Hello everyone, in this tutorial I'm gonna show you how to group these basic body parts, okay? So what do we mean by creating a hierarchy? Create hierarchy of body parts. So we want to be able to move, to actually pose our creatures later, okay? So that's why we were thinking about what are the parts that are moving together so we can group them and later like create the hierarchy for them. So creating the hierarchy means that, okay, if I grab this arm here and I rotate it, I want the rest of the body parts like the forearm and the hand to move with it, right? And that's how I can pose this character. For example, put this right hand right next to its leg, right? Because if I have to go in and just rotate each part or even each groups of parts individually, it's going to be a nightmare, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to create a hierarchy which tells, okay, whenever I move this part, I want the rest of these parts to follow, okay? And we're going to do this by creating a hierarchy. So it means that I'm going to decide that, okay, I'm going to have this arm and then I want to group this forearm. You can find it here. I'm going to group this under this arm. So whenever I move this arm, this forearm is going to follow. And I'm going to do this for the rest of the body parts that are supposed to be following each other. Like this hand, whenever I grab the arm and I want to move the arm, I want the hand and forearm to follow, right? But there's a hierarchy. I cannot just put forearm and hand, both of them, at the same level when I create the hierarchy. Why? Because later I might want to grab the hand and move it by itself, right? That's why it needs to be grouped like at the lower level of hierarchy. It's going to be more clear when I'm doing it here. So just keep this map in mind. I'm going to just push it aside to my other monitor. Let's grab it back. So the first thing is, like for any creature, you need to decide what body part is the main body part that you want to grab and move the whole creature with it. Most of the times, it's going to be the hip. Okay, so I want this basic humanoid. I want, if I grab this hip and move this, I want the whole body to move with it. So this means that this hip is the topest level of my hierarchy. It means that all the other things are going to be grouped under this, right? So let's see. So I know the first step, so I decided that this hip here in the outliner, and by the way, if your outliner is not showing, you can just click here, show and hide outliner, okay? So I can see in the outliner, the first step is done. I decided this is the top of my hierarchy. It means that when I grab this and move it, I want every other body part to move with it, okay? Just to make things easier, let's just put the pivot point for, well, it's not necessary, never mind. Or maybe it is. Okay, let's just select everything except for this locator, which it doesn't matter if you select it too. So I select everything and I want to put the pivot points of every object at the center of the object, okay? Just going to select this. And to do this, I'm going to go to modify and I'm going to go to center pivot, okay? So now if I click on any object and hit W to move them, you can see that the manipulator shows at the pivot point, which is at the center of the object. Okay, we did some house cleaning. Let's get to work. Okay, so hip is the top of the hierarchy. So what is next? There are other things that live at the same level after the hip. Like for example, if I grab the hip, I know that the torso and the upper legs should move with it, right? If I want to do this, like if I move this, this three parts should move with it. I'm gonna hit Control Z. And it is really important that everything, the transformation should be set at 0. Okay, so select everything, and I already did that. But if you move body parts and you're not sure if you're placing them at the 0, 0, just go to modify and do freeze transformation. Okay, freeze transformation, just to make sure. Okay, so the next thing would be, okay, I know this is the main body part, the hip is the top level of my hierarchy. The next level would be torso. Okay, so I'm just gonna group torso under the hip. Okay, I'm gonna go to my outliner, select on the torso, and middle click, drag it to the hip. Okay, you can see that the torso is now grouped under the hip, right? So now if I click on the hip and move it, you can see that the torso moves with it. Success, right? But because you grouped it, you can also go in and move the torso by itself, right? If you want to rotate it later, you can do that. The pivot point is not at the right place now, so we're not going to be worried about that. We can always change that. The first step would be to create the hierarchy. Okay, so now that we successfully could move the torso with the hip, let's get to the next part. We want the upper leg to move with the torso as well, right? So let's just do that. I'm gonna grab upper left leg and just middle click, drag in the outliner. I'm gonna group it under the hip, not under the torso, okay, under the hip. Why? Because I wanna later, for example, let's just say I wanna rotate this upper body part. I don't want the leg to move with it, right? That's why I don't, the hierarchy becomes essential. Okay, just ask yourself, if you move this body part, do you want the other body parts to move with it? If the answer is yes, they go under it. If the answer is no, you should be careful not to put it there, okay? So now, if I move the hip, you can see that the left leg, upper leg is moving with it, okay? I'm going to do the same with the right leg, upper left leg, okay? Upper leg right. So here, again, I'm going to click, I'm going to drag and put it under the hip, okay? Let's make the mistake of putting it under the torso. Now I did it, okay? So you can see that when I click the hip and move this, it moves together with the hip. But when I rotate the torso, or move the torso, let's say we want to rotate the torso. We never want to move the torso, right? See, the leg goes up. We don't want that, right? As the creature like bends in the front or the back, the leg shouldn't be affected, right? So we just do Control Z. We come back here. We can see that we put the leg in the right hierarchy, so we just can do Shift P to ungroup it, or you can just again click and middle drag and drag it to the right order. Okay, we want to have the upper leg under the hip. Okay, so we did this part. We moved this leg, hip like this, everything moves with it. We move the torso, nothing moves with it. We move the legs, and nothing moves with the legs, right? So we're doing fine so far, right? So now we connected everything to the hip. So let's move down the hierarchy. Moving down the hierarchy, what does it mean? So it means that, okay, so what happens to this lower leg? What happens to that? Do I group it under the hip or under the right leg? What would be the answer? Coming soon. Just think about it. What would be the group for this? Should I group it under the hip or the right leg? The correct answer would be the right leg, right? I'm gonna just middle click, drag it to the upper leg. And you can see that now if I move the torso, everything moves with it. It means that the top level group is fine. But look at this. If I move the upper leg, the lower leg moves with it, and that's fine. And I can go again and, for example, rotate it by itself, right? So that's the correct hierarchy for that. So if I do it, for example, like this, if I group it under the hip, when I select the hip and move it, you can see that it moves with it, but it doesn't move when I move the upper leg. So that's not the correct hierarchy, right? So I'm just gonna go in and put the lower leg under the upper leg, right? I'm gonna do the same with the foot, right? It's the same thing again, but I want this foot to move with the lower leg, right? So I'm just gonna group it under the lower leg. Just gonna click on this plus here, you can see that it appears here. And that's what we mean by hierarchy, right? You can see at the top level there's hip, there's torso, there's upper leg, there's lower leg, upper leg left and upper leg right. But the upper leg right, it has its own hierarchy, right? It has this lower leg to it, and then the foot should follow the lower leg. So each part that follows the other parts, it should be under that part, right? So I'm not gonna do this because it's the same. I'm gonna move up to the neck, okay? So we did the torso, we have this neck and two arms that are at the same level, okay? So I'm gonna just, because when I move the torso, I want the neck and all the rest to follow, right? So I'm just gonna do the same thing. It's the same way of thinking. So when I want to move the torso, I want the arm to move with it, so I just put arm under the torso. And now when I move the torso, the arm moves with it, and I can separately move the arm, right? I'm going to do the same with the left arm. Left arm goes under the torso, right? Now when I move the torso, I can move the two arms with it. Let's check with the hip. Everything moves. I can move the legs. Nothing else here is moving, so everything is fine, right? The neck is at the same level, so neck goes directly under the torso, right? Under the torso. But here we have the head. We might want to move the head separately from the neck. If your creature is in such a way that the head and neck are not, like the head is not supposed to move by itself and you always want to grab the neck and just move it there, you can just group head and neck at the same level. You should group the head and neck together and then put the hierarchy for the group under the torso. But we're going to get to that in another tutorial when I have this creature that I created and has like more details to it. For the basic of it, we're just thinking about like how these objects are supposed to move. Don't think about grouping yet, okay? So now I want the head to move with the neck, right? I want whenever I move the neck, just think about your own body. When you move your neck, your head moves, right? So you want the head to follow the neck. That's why head goes under the neck, right? Click on this plus to see your hierarchy. Everything looks good. Moving on to the hands, the forearm right should follow the arm right. So I'm just gonna middle click, drag it to the right arm, and the hand should follow the forearm right. I'm just gonna drag it under the forearm so you can see the hierarchy now, right? Move this, everything moves. I move this, the hand moves with it, and I can also move the hand separately, right? I'm just gonna do the rest of it quickly because it's pretty much the same. So here, lower leg left goes here, foot left goes here, forearm left goes under the torso, and the left hand where is, okay, where is this forearm left? Oh. Okay, it's just here. Forearm left goes under the arm. I guess I did it wrong previously. Okay, sorry about that. And the hand goes under the forearm. So now you can see when I move the hip, everything moves with it, right? When I move the leg, the whole leg moves. When I move here, everything moves with it. So that's, you know, we created the hierarchy, right? Because when we grab the object that leads the other objects, they move together. And we can also go in and click on any like object that are lower in the hierarchy and move them separately, right? That's exactly what we want. So now that we have everything, the only thing that is left is to set the pivot point, right? For example, here I can rotate this arm, but I don't want it to be rotated around this point here, right? So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna just click on this arm and I'm gonna hit 4 to go to wireframe mode. What I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna put the pivot point exactly at this point in the center. That's where I want the arm to be rotated. Again, just think about yourself. Your arm moves from where it is attached to the body, right? So we should put the pivot point there. To change the pivot point, we hold down D, and you can hold down V for snap, and then you can click on this cute little thingy here and just drag it until it is attached to the point here, right? So now if I move the arm, everything moves with it, right? We did the arm part, woohoo! Let's try this. So this is good, it moves together, but it is not moving at the right pivot point. So let's fix the pivot point for that too. I'm just gonna click on the, I'm just gonna hold down D for going to pivot mode, and then holding down V for snapping, and I'm gonna just snap it to here, the point at the center. Now if I wanna rotate it, it rotates right. I'm gonna do the same for this object. Let's see what would be the good candidate for attaching the pivot point. I can just attach it to the point of the forearm. Yeah, I'm gonna just do that. Holding down D, holding down V, I'm just gonna attach it here. Going back to my shaded preview, hitting 6. So this looks good. And you do the same for every other part. Like for the hip, center of the hip is fine, but for the torso, you want it to be, for example, moved not at that pivot point, but probably at the pivot point that it's, you know, at the point that is on, it's, you know, on the torso object, or at the point that is on the hip object. It all depends to your own design, but for this creature, you can do either. It doesn't matter that much. Okay, I'm gonna hold down the D and then V. Just gonna snap it here. Going back to my shaded viewport. Ooh, isn't it fun? It's amazing, right? And you do the same thing for the rest of it. I'm not gonna do the whole thing, but you know, you get the idea. Wherever you want it to be bent, you go in and put the pivot point for that object there. And that's it. At the end, you get a creature that you can move and bend, right?